heavy rains continue to batter parts of the country, leaving hundreds of people homeless. This is also affecting a number of things, including the provision of food and water. Government has now declared a national state of disaster in response to the flooding, which is affecting 7 out of the country's 9 provinces. So let's bring you this discussion now. We're joined by Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, who is a climate, water and food systems expert at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Prof, great to have you with us on the program. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. It does feel like we have these discussions in circles, right? Every time there is a flood disaster in our country, we ask the same questions, and perhaps at the top of that list is, why do we not have a more preemptive response to the flooding rather than reactive, which has been the case?
Well, I'll put it back to you first to say it's mostly because we only have these conversations when there's been a situation. We should be having these conversations throughout before there is a situation, so that we are constantly raising levels of awareness in the society, amongst our government officials, and elevating the issue so that it receives proactive attention, not reactive attention, as we often do when there's a disaster. Then we come out, we say a lot of stuff, government runs around like they are doing now, and then it passes over, we move on. But we need to have a more sustained and proactive approach to dealing with the whole issue of climate change, what it means for people, what it means for society, for our livelihoods, and everything else that is around us.
Yeah, certainly. Before we get to the issue of climate change, Prof, I want to talk to you about, what informs this preemptive response, and that would be having the right information at our fingertips when it comes to flooding. Do we have those data systems available in our country?
Yes, we do. You'll notice every time when it has flooded, the South African Weather Service has actually issued out warnings. They have got an impact-based early warning system, which is the color-coded system from 1 to 10, and they do issue out warnings, say level 1 or level 5, and this is what it means in terms of the expected impact. What lacks is the dissemination of the information right up to the person who is going to be affected. What then lacks is also the capacity on the affected persons to respond or to use that information correctly, to say, this is what it means for me, these are the necessary steps that I need to take. And this is from local municipalities coming down to individuals within communities. So that's where the gap is, building the effective response capabilities.
So, Prof, let's take the discussion back down to the basics, right? What are the major contributors insofar as particularly localized flooding is concerned? Our viewers would have noticed, if we've been tracking the story, that we saw so much flooding, particularly in what looked like residential areas. Water streaming down the middle of a street, houses submerged in water almost halfway up their walls. So what are the contributors? And part of that discussion, I suppose, is our town planning. Should we even be building homes in particular parts of the country?
Okay, so we have discussed the need for climate-sensitive spatial planning, which takes into consideration the intersection between the built and the ecological infrastructure. So a lot of the challenges that we have relate to the fact that our climate or our spatial planning is not very climate sensitive in that regard. We've got a lot of land use change in terms of urban expansion. So the natural ecosystems, we have disturbed a lot of them. The natural buffer zones, which would have been used for flood attenuation, are no longer there. People have moved into wetlands, which would be on natural draining areas. We've got more concrete surfaces, which naturally means we are generating more runoff than we need to. And there are other smaller issues such as, lack of proper waste or collection, which means stormwater drains are blocked. So when it rains, they don't manage to cope. And also the designs themselves not being adequate for the amounts of rainfall that we are receiving. So it requires a very integrated type of approach that takes into consideration the built infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, the ecological infrastructure, the environment, the communities themselves from a socio-economic perspective, in terms of why do we have people, especially informal settlements, located in these low-lying areas. Because in those low-lying areas, there's usually a river, a source of water, there is usually a place where they can have a small garden and so forth. So there are various reasons which then come together to impact or affect or make people vulnerable within this context. And then we end up seeing the results that we are witnessing now.
I mean, if we were to address the issues that you've just outlined, Prof, that would be a massive job, right? It would mean complete redesigns of parts of our country, resettlement of large numbers of people. Where do we even begin to try and sort of undo the damage we've already done?
So we have to start somewhere, essentially. I think we've got the right plans in place in terms of the strategies that government has developed. Most of them are correct. They speak to international best practice. We've just not funded them correctly. I think the president did acknowledge last year when we had the KZN floods that we have not invested enough in terms of climate change adaptation, in terms of climate proofing our settlements, in terms of investments in resilient infrastructure. So that's a large gap, really, in terms of the funding. In many instances, we don't need to relocate people, but we need to just come in and retrofit and improve the design and integrate, certain systems into where they are, stormwater drainage, strengthen people's homes so that they are not vulnerable and collapse easily, and also ensure that things like early warnings are disseminated at a community level, community-based early warning, so that people know early on that it's going to flood, I'm in an affected area, and I need to move to this particular area, this is higher ground, and things like that.
Yeah. We mentioned the importance of climate change in a discussion like this one, Prof. In your experience, what is the political attitude in our country insofar as investing in climate change projects is concerned?
I think it has been prioritized to the level of the presidency. We've got the Presidential Climate Commission that has been set up, but it requires, it remains an issue of funding. So we can have commissions, we can have strategies and documents, but if we do not have the funds to back it up, then it comes to naught. And I think it speaks to the broader conversation around many other things that are struggling, within the broader economy, mostly due to a lack of proper funding and sustained investment, or proactive funding, rather to say so.
Absolutely. Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, let me thank you for your time this morning. He's a climate, water and food systems expert as we continue to track the toll that the latest bout of flooding is taking on the country. A state of disaster declared with 7 out of 9 provinces being impacted. It's just